We have now finally made it into the offseason here in the Portland Trail Blazers, my NBA franchise. We've gone through the league-wide rebrand. We've gone through the rest of the postseason. We've gone through our college basketball recap. And now we can finally get things started. Today we will do everything leading up to the NBA draft. That includes the draft lottery, the NBA draft combine, and of course our draft preview. So in the last episode, we saw that the Spurs won the NBA Finals despite Victor Wembanyama, their best player, tearing his meniscus in the Western Conference Finals. No Wemby, no problem. They beat the Pistons in 6. As I mentioned, we also had our college basketball recap going over how a lot of the prospects within this year's draft did. And today we're going to talk about where many of their stocks are and what their fits are going to be in the NBA. So let's not waste any time and let's get started here with the offseason. And that'll start with player retirements. A few notable names here, including a handful of current and former Blazers. Russell Westbrook retires as the Trailblazer. Robin Lopez, Nicholas Batum, a couple other guys who played here, and a few other decent players. But I think there's only one Hall of Famer from this group, and it is going to be Russell Westbrook. The staff retirement stage, I would argue, was more interesting, with guys like Tom Thibodeau, Mike Malone, even Lloyd Pierce hanging up the clipboard, as Russell Westbrook obviously makes the Hall of Fame. 9-time All-Star, 9-time All-NBA. Of course, he won an MVP with Oklahoma City, and he unsurprisingly will get his number 0 retired by the Thunder. As for rule changes, we will be doing what the real NBA did with the All-Star game, and that's that there's going to be no more All-Star draft, and it's just going to be the best players from the Eastern Conference facing off against the best players of the Western Conference. That'll now bring us into the draft lottery, and I think this is the most important lottery we've had yet. With a guy like Dante Del Toro, who looks like one of the better prospects of the last 10 to 15 years, the teams at the top of this lottery are going to want to win this one bad. Our Blazers, of course, do not have a lottery pick, since we were really good this year, so we're going to watch from the sidelines. The Suns will get the 14th pick. The 13th pick will go to the Dallas Mavericks. The 12th pick will be made by the Sacramento Kings. The 11th pick will belong to the Utah Jazz. And then the 10th pick will go to the Orlando Magic, who have swapping rights with Phoenix. They'll stay at 10. No movement so far. This one's an interesting spot here with the Rockets. They will stay at 9. Thankfully, one of our biggest competitors in the Western Conference will not move up. The 8th pick goes to the New York Knicks. The 7th pick will belong to the Golden State Warriors. Still no movement as we get here to number 6, which will be made by the Oklahoma City Thunder. And then the 5th pick, finally our first change, it's the Thunder, who dropped from 2 to 5. So OKC gets screwed, which again is good for us since they're one of the better teams in the West. The Wizards entered the lottery with the best odds. They fall all the way to 4. The 3rd pick will go to the New Orleans Pelicans. The 2nd pick will go to the Atlanta Hawks. And that means the number 1 pick in the NBA draft will go to the Los Angeles Lakers. Who would have thought, when there's a truly elite prospect at the top of the draft, the Lakers are going to get that player, or at least get the opportunity to select him? What an absolute shocker. Nobody, and I mean nobody, could have seen that one coming. I will say, though, I am curious to see if the Lakers look to potentially trade that pick or stick and pick, likely with Dante Del Toro. We had the 28th pick in the first round, but we've got a lot of good picks coming up, including a swap with the Heat in 2027. We own the Heat's first-round pick unprotected in 2028, and then we own Detroit's pick in 2029. As for our staff changes, nothing overly notable here. We're going to be bringing back head coach Chauncey Billups. I think he's done a fantastic job with the young talent. And now that brings us to the NBA Draft Combine and thus our draft preview. This is a really talented draft at the top. We're probably not going to be picking very highly unless we make a big trade, kind of like we did last year moving up to get Khalil Griffin. So it'll be interesting to see how we navigate the board this year. Coming into the season, it looks like a 3-player draft with Dante Del Toro, Jaylen Richmond, and Mars Ingram Jr. However, I think Del Toro has separated himself from the group and making himself the clear number 1 pick in this year's draft. Del Toro is the modern-day forward who a franchise can legitimately build around. On offense, he's super skilled. He can handle the ball, he can shoot the ball, he can pass the ball, and he can run the rim. On defense, he is remarkable. He's versatile on defense. He can guard the 1 through the 5 at a high level. He's got the quickness to hang with guards and the strength and physicality to match up with bigs. In one of the best European leagues in the world, he averaged around 16, 7, and 3 on good shooting splits while playing elite defense. This is the best prospect we've seen in this series so far, and I think the Lakers would be wild not to pick him number 1 overall. As for the other two guys, I think both of them have slipped a little bit. For Jaylen Richmond, it's not really his fault. He tore his ACL in January during ACC play and missed half the year, only playing 17 games. When healthy, he did play pretty well, though. This is somebody who's got a good feel as a passer and a scorer. Some of these grades are not accurate because of the injury. For example, he definitely does not have F inside scoring. The one thing that needs some work with him is his efficiency. He's a little bit spotty inside and out, but that's something that I think can easily be fixed. And then there's Ingram Jr., the talented guard from Oak Hill Academy. Of course, the one-and-done rule has been abolished, and high school players can now enter the league. Ingram Jr. is a really talented scoring threat. This is somebody who can create his own shot at all 3 levels, and he is a gifted offensive player. The question with him, though, is obviously the lack of competition. He hasn't played past the high school level. He's done well in every circuit he's been through, but he hasn't played against grown men yet, and that's kind of the question that some teams have. His teammate, Dejon Hill, actually has a chance to go ahead of him. Hill's numbers were a little bit worse throughout the year, but scouts are really impressed by his overall efficiency and body of work. He's undersized at only 6 foot, but his ability to drive inside and finish is really impressive. He's one of the most athletic players in the draft and has a lot of similarities to a smaller De'Aaron Fox with his quickness and ability to get to the basket. Colo Dumolo from Baylor is another guy who I think very well could be in play for the top 5. He is a monster on the defensive end of the floor. He's a good rebounder. He can guard just about everybody, and he is one of the best defensive prospects in this draft. He's got a lot of work to do offensively. He can't really shoot the ball, but other than that, he checks off all the boxes. He's a good finisher. He's a pretty good playmaker. If he improves the jump shot, he's going to be able to have every skill you look for as a forward and will be worth a top 5 selection. Chance Coradino from Pitt is a really interesting player because he's a 3-year guy at Pitt. Wasn't a super high recruit, but scouts really like his overall skill set. At 7'1", he gives you everything you look for, especially on offense. He's a good finisher, he's got good touch around the basket, and he can shoot the ball. Not a great playmaker, though, and he needs to improve a lot defensively, but scouts really like his guard-like ability at 7'1". Cyrus Awari from Auburn had a great season this year, averaging around 17 a game, helping lead Auburn to the Final Four, winning his regional tournament's MVP. He was a little inconsistent throughout the year, but I think if nothing else, he's going to be a good 3-and-D player with upside to be an all-star 2-way guard at the next level. Giovani Merritt had a really solid season in the NBA's G League Ignite, and I think his professional background is really going to help him out transitioning to the next level. He's a talented all-around wing who averaged around 14 a night. He needs some work as a shooter and as a playmaker, but I think he's got the raw abilities in terms of doing both. Defensively, he's got some work to do as well, but I think he's got the athleticism, I think he's got the IQ, and I think he'll be able to really carve out a role at the next level. Devald Durma from Princeton is a guy whose stock really went up throughout the year. We haven't talked about him a ton yet, but as a junior, he averaged 17 and 11, one of the smartest players on the floor, and he's pretty skilled as well. Really good defensively. I don't think the shooting grades here do him justice. Shot 50% from the field and 38% from 3 this year, also averaging close to 3 assists per game. I think he's got some talent as a playmaker as well. William Abimbola from UCLA is a very intriguing young center. He's super raw, but I think he's got all the upside in the world. 7'3", less than 200 pounds. He's an intriguing physical specimen who I think could be a really good defensive player at the next level, and I think he's got the offensive skills too, but he's got a lot of work to do. Cydney Hermano is a guy who I think is kind of being slept on. I think he's one of the 5 best players in this draft. I think he probably does end up in the top 10, but I'm not fully convinced of it. Hermano hails from Switzerland. He played in another very strong European league, and he was really good this year, averaging around 12, 4, and 3. The one issue with him was his inconsistencies as a scorer, especially from 3, but I think he's got great upside as a shot maker. He's a really solid athlete. Defensively, he's also got a lot of work to do, so I don't know if a contending team is going to be interested in him because he's not a great shooter or defensive player, but I think he's got the athleticism, size, and length, to eventually be really good at both skills. Mogas Kosas, the talented center from Lithuania, is more of your throwback, old-school type of big man in the sense that he can really hang down low. He knows how to use his size and his physicality, but I think he's got some intriguing skills that make him worthwhile in today's modern NBA and will be a good use of a possible late lottery selection. He's an all-around solid scorer. His defense could use some work, but I think it could be pretty solid. His lack of quickness isn't ideal, but at 7'2", 255, he wins with his size and not necessarily his athleticism. We've got a solid group of guards here that includes Wesley Deagle out of Michigan. Really solid all-around player who I think teams in the late lottery are going to like. Deagle averaged around 13 and 4 this year. Shooting splits were a little inconsistent, but at 6'7", this is somebody who can handle the ball. He's a solid defensive player, and he's a good shot creator. It's just that he wasn't as efficient as I think he will be at the next level. But overall, I do think he'll be a good three-point shooter down the line, and I like his overall upside being a essentially 6'7" combo guard. So Zander Hopkins from IMG Academy is kind of a polarizing prospect because I think he was a little bit disappointing this year and his stock has gone down a little bit, but he's still a really talented player, averaging around 19, 5, and 5, and doing so with good shooting splits. Hopkins is an athletic guard who can create his own shot. He's a good playmaker. He's not great finishing inside, nor is he great defensively, and especially having only played high school competition. Again, I think he's going to get picked apart pretty early on in his NBA career, but if he improves defensively, he'll be really good. Kaden Braken from Creighton is one of the biggest draft risers of the year. He averaged around 15 points a game, and he did it on ridiculous efficiency, 55% from the field and 46% from three. The shooting splits here do not do him justice. He is a knockdown three-point shooter, whether it's on the ball or off the ball. I think his offensive versatility is going to be really nice because this is somebody who can shoot off the catch, shoot off the dribble, and create his own shot. That brings us to this next group of players outside of the lottery, possibly guys who the Blazers could look at with their first-round pick if they fall, and that starts with Cameron Carlile out of USC. A guy whose stock I kind of thought fell down throughout the year because he didn't shoot the three ball that well, but scouts still really like him. He's probably still going to be a top 20 pick because of his size and length, his defensive upside, and his versatility. He only shot 29% from three, but he's got good form, and I think he will be a better three-point shooter in the NBA than he was this year at school. Jaylen Thaba for Marquette for most of the year was regarded as a top prospect. Scouts are now finding some concerns with his offensive efficiency. Only shot 43% from the field and 28% from three. He also doesn't really provide a ton as a playmaker, but I don't think that's a major issue. I think defensively is where Thamba's bread and butter is. He's versatile on that end of the floor. He can guard the 2 through the 5. He's a little inconsistent defensively, but I think he's got the upside there to be really good. And I think his shot will come along. I think he just wasn't really used properly at Marquette, and he's another guy who I think is going to be a better offensive player, better shooter here in the NBA than he was in college. Samoan forward Sua Tanii, I think, is a guy who's really being slept on. Having played for the Brisbane Bullets in the NBL, he's coming off a really solid year. Defensively is where he's really at his best. A monster on the defensive end of the floor. He's got the athleticism and the versatility to guard just about everybody. He averaged around 10 and 7 this year. He's a good rebounder. And I think he's a really good fit for what the Blazers are looking for. A guy who can defend a bunch of positions, grab boards, a little bit inconsistent offensively. He doesn't really have much of a three ball, but I think his offensive upside is pretty solid. Now we're really looking at the guys who could very well be in play for the Blazers' 28th overall pick, assuming they don't choose to move their selection. Jonathan Wigam had a great freshman season at Gonzaga, averaging around 13, 5, and 5, helping lead Gonzaga to a spot in the national championship and was their best player during their tournament run. I'm not really sure why his stock isn't higher than it is. He's probably going to be a late first-round pick, but I think he's one of the 10 to 15 best players in the draft. He's a great three-level scorer, great passer, not a good defensive player, but on offense, he's one of the best players in the entire draft class. And I think he makes up for his lack of defense with how good of a three-level scorer he is. Xander Crossan from Auburn is another guy I really like in this range. There are some intriguing players here such as Maya To'oto'o, Kellen Sternberger, and Victor Aboye. But I think Crossan's going to be the guy to watch here because he is such a good defensive player. He provides nothing on offense, a complete black hole. He only averaged 5 points a game this year on Auburn, and he did it on poor efficiency. He doesn't really give you anything as a playmaker, but he will lock up your opposing best player. Think Andre Roberson with him. Not going to give you anything on the offensive end of the floor, but he will make sure that the opposing team's best scorer will be summoned into the black hole. And for contending teams, there are absolutely uses for a guy like Xander Crossan. Going down the board a little bit, I think Keontae Cameron-Isles is going to be a good 3-and-D player out of USC. Naquan Washington is a guy we've highlighted throughout the year. He had a great freshman season at Oklahoma, averaging nearly 17 points a game, and he did it on good efficiency, shooting around 46% from the field and 40% from three. He's a good defensive player as well, and I think his overall well-rounded skill set is going to make him a really good player at the next level. I'm not really sure why he's listed this far down either. He should go a lot earlier than this. Another guy like Wigam, who's probably a lottery talent and realistically should go in the top 15 picks. Cas Campbell from Arkansas might have been the best college basketball player in the country this year. He had a ridiculously good season, averaging 16 points, 8 boards, and 5 assists, helping lead Arkansas to a national title. He can space the floor, he can shoot the ball, he's got versatility on and off the ball, good playmaker, good defensive player. He checks off all the boxes. Another winning player who I think would be a great fit for a team like us who's looking for role players who can help contend for a title. Now looking at guys projected here in the second round who could be options for our top pick if a lot of the guys we like don't fall. That starts with Duke Matherin from Kansas, a guy we really have not talked about at all during the draft cycle, but his stock is starting to rise a little bit. He's a solid finisher and scorer. He's a pretty good playmaker, not a particularly good defensive player, but I think his offensive upside is really intriguing for the early second round. Not only do we have the 28th pick, keep in mind, but we also have the 6th pick in the second round, so we have 2 picks in this range, technically. Emmanuel Loren is a French forward who is really starting to get on some NBA teams' radars. They really like the upside with this kid, and it's easy to understand why. He's big, physical, and has ridiculous athleticism for his size, coming in at 6'10", weighing in at around 230 pounds. He is a monster inside on both ends of the floor. Doesn't really have an outside game and doesn't really provide a ton of versatility, but inside on offense, he is a beast, and defensively, he's getting there. His athleticism is off the charts at his size, and I think the upside with him is really high for an early second-round pick. We've talked about some of the other guys here, including Ashton Wisham, the big man out of St. Louis. But I want to go over Emanuel Salvador. He's a really interesting player coming from Kentucky. He was a projected top 10 pick going into the year. And he had a solid freshman season with the Wildcats, averaging 13, 5, and 3. But scouts are really concerned about his shot making. For somebody who's prided on his ability on and off the ball, he can't really create his own shot, at least at this stage of his career. Shot less than 30% from 3, and it's not that he's a bad shooter. He just doesn't really know how to get open with the ball in his hands or out of his hands. But I think his two-way skill set is really intriguing and still is worth a flyer in the late first round. Demetrius Bayith from Kentucky is another guy who scouts are really starting to like, and I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up in the first round as well. This is somebody who can run the floor. He's a little bit inconsistent on offense. He only averaged around 9.5 points a game this year, and he was a little bit inefficient, but I think he's got a good three-point shot. He can drive to the basket. He can finish in contact, and I think there is some upside with him defensively. He's not a bad defensive player, although I think there is some work there, but I think he's got some versatility at 6'9", 210 pounds to guard multiple positions on the perimeter and down low. A few other guys to talk about in this range include Ohio State forward Armani Robinson. We talked about him earlier in the year, very intriguing athlete. Kealoha Florent from Virginia Tech, I think, is also really good. But the real gem to watch here for at the end of the draft is Stanford big man Trevon Maan. He was not on anybody's draft radar coming into the season, and he was mostly a backup for Stanford this year. But he got some real time to play in the tournament, and he was unbelievable, helping lead Stanford to the Final Four as a 10 seed, and it's not because of his offense. He only averaged 9 points a game in the tournament. He also averaged 5 blocks. This is an unbelievable defensive player, a ridiculously good shot blocker, and yes, there's a lack of sample size. He was mostly a backup this year, and offensively, he's got a lot of work to do. But he averaged around 4 blocks a game per 40 minutes throughout the season, and so I think his overall defensive upside is really going to intrigue some teams to take a potential shot on him at the end of the second round. That's our draft preview. A lot of really talented players to go through and plenty of talented players who we didn't talk about who I think could carve out good roles in the NBA. Let's take a look at the mock drafts now. We'll start with the sporting news. No major surprises at the top. Dante Del Toro will be the #1 pick. Jaylen Richmond, despite the ACL injury, at 2. No major surprises at the top of this draft. I think this mock draft seems pretty reasonable. They've got us going with Cas Campbell at the end of the first round. If he's there, I think that would be an absolutely phenomenal pick. Thing is, I don't think he makes it to the 28th pick. I think somebody's going to fall in love with him. And then they've got us going with Emmanuel Salvador in the 2nd round. Again, I think that'd be a really nice pick. But he's going to fall there? I'd be surprised. 2K's mock drafts, I think, are always ironically the worst ones. Pretty similar at the top with Dante Del Toro, Jaylen Richmond at the top. They've got us going with Ace McCoy Jr., the combo guard from UCLA. And then again, Emmanuel Salvador. Pretty interesting that they seem to really be linking us with Salvador, who I think could be worth a flyer. As for NBA.com, again, pretty similar at the top. Interesting that they've got guys like Colo Dumolo and Chance Coradino ahead of the Oak Hill guards, but I could certainly see that happening. And then at pick 28, they've got us going with Duke Mathurin out of Kansas. And then in the 2nd round, the St. Louis big man, Ashton Wisham. I think this would be a solid draft for us if we end up with Mathurin and Wisham. 2 very intriguing players whose skill sets I think would be pretty good fits along our roster. Let's take a look at the NBA Draft Combine now, trying to figure out which players we potentially want to invite for pre-draft workouts. Some notable standouts include William Abimbola, the center out of UCLA, put up freakishly athletic times. Demetrius Bayith from Kentucky did really well. Cas Campbell from Arkansas was really impressive. Some other guys down the board who were good include Dejon Hill, the Oak Hill guard, super quick, super athletic. Trevon Maan, the Stanford center, did pretty solid. Interestingly, they have Jaylen Richmond having tested, which is weird because, well, he's 4 months off of an ACL injury. Cyrus Awari, the Auburn guard, I was a little bit disappointed with. I was hoping for more out of him. And then Jonathan Wigam, the guard from Gonzaga, I think did pretty well. As for our pre-draft workouts, we're not going to invite the super top guys because realistically, we're not going to end up with them. But I did invite some of the higher projected players in case they possibly slip. Maybe we move up for them. Maybe they end up falling all the way to the 28th pick. Some notable standouts include Devald Durma, the Princeton forward, who tested off the charts. Sprint time below 3 is ridiculous for somebody of his size. Demetrius Bayith wowed scouts with his shooting at the combine, and he shot the ball just as well with our pre-draft workouts. Sua Tanii also did really well. He was decent enough in the shooting drills, and he tested well athletically. Chance Coradino, the Pitt center, I thought did a pretty good job as well. Shot the ball well. He's not the most athletic, but he tested pretty well too. Jonathan Wigam, the Gonzaga guard, really shot the ball well. His shooting ability is super impressive. And the same can be said with Cas Campbell, who shot quite a bit better at our pre-draft workout than he did at the combine. Him, Wigam, and Bayith were probably our best overall shooters, although Chance Coradino was not too far behind them, the 7'1 center. So that'll wrap up the episode. Next time around, we've got the NBA draft. What do you guys think we should do? Let me know down below in the comments. Should we package our picks to move up? Should we move down? Should we look to add a proven veteran player with our selections? And if we do keep our picks, which prospects should we potentially look at to add to our roster? Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel if you are new. Peace out.